When you think of massive militaries in the Star Wars galaxy, you're probably not thinking of the Hutts. When I think of the Hutts, I think of fat slugs. I think of that thing Jabba does with his tongue when he's being choked out by Princess Leia. And I mean, fair enough to not consider the Hutt military. It's certainly not as directly impactful on the galaxy as factions like the Empire or the Yuuzhan Vong. At least the modern Star Wars galaxy. I'll probably talk a bit about historical Hutt fleets near the end of this video. However, when evaluating the Hutts, we have to take into account that Hutt space really has remained untouched for thousands of years, with them only really losing territory during the rule of the Empire. Though Hutt space was also temporarily devastated by the Yuuzhan Vong during their invasion, that was largely due to the Hutts making bad decisions, but their stability was due to the fact that, despite not being a galactic-level hostile power, the Hutts had a really impressive military. Now, because they don't appear as frequently as, say, the Empire as direct antagonists, we're not told a whole lot about, say, the exact numbers or specifications of Hutt ships, but that's where a friend of the channel, the Thrawn's Revenge mod, comes in. Thrawn's Revenge has taken this now iconic illustration coming from the Essential Guide to Warfare and fleshed out every warship within it and given them actual stats. And the one we're going to be talking about specifically for today's video is the Dor'bulla, which originates from an RPG sourcebook known as Lords of Nal Hutta. And just to briefly touch on what this book tells us, we know the Dor'bulla was a rare ship within the Hutt fleet. The full quote specifically says that the Gwaria shipyards on Nal Hutta serve as the primary source for Hutt spacecraft throughout the region. The rarely seen Dor'bulla-class warship is manufactured in these sprawling facilities to the south of Dousa. The mod team, and we are moving into fanon territory at this point, took the illustration of the Dor'bulla plus this quote to take that the ship must have been rare, but also powerful within the Hutt military, and they gave it the following specifications. The Dor'bulla stands at 4 kilometers and is a warship capable of rivaling some of the strongest Imperial designs like the Allegiance. This is accomplished through a really impressive armament of weaponry, including 12 heavy dual turbo laser batteries, 18 medium turbo laser batteries, 8 heavy ion cannons, 4 assault concussion missile tubes, and 4 ordinary concussion missile tubes. This armament was supported by one of the toughest hulls that the Hutts and their bank accounts could afford. And the most impressive part of all this was that the design wasn't introduced after Endor like we saw with many powerful non-Imperial ships. Instead, the Hutts saw the declaration of the Empire and were smart enough to predict what was coming. Thus, they introduced the warship late into the Clone Wars or early into the Imperial era. Now, don't get me wrong, the Hutts already had an impressive military that neither the CIS nor the Republic would really consider attacking. But when you add this behemoth of a battlecruiser, you turn the Hutts into a power that even Palpatine would be cautious of angering. The influence wielded by the Hutts would remain into the post-Endor period, where in spite of the chaos that Imperial warlords would cause, the Hutts wouldn't really involve themselves in a major galactic conflict, instead settling in as a thorn in the side of the New Republic, stopping them for a while from connecting their biggest shipyards with the rest of their efforts. And one of the things that allowed them to do that was that no one knew the true size of their military. And when you are an Imperial warlord or the New Republic, you can't risk an attack against a major starship like a Dor'bulla. The only real disadvantage that the ship had against other starships like the Star Destroyer were its weak shield systems and its lack of speed. Even a Star Destroyer, which to be fair is a quite fast capital ship for its size, could outrun the Dor'bulla, so it required some support from smaller ships like the Cossack or Ubrikian frigate. However, its role as a heavy bulwark against other military powers on the galaxy would remain all the way to the Yuuzhan Vong. Again, much of that is fanon lore. I want to make it clear that's sort of the backstory that the mod has invented for the ship, but I really like it, and at this point, with Legends no longer continuing, feel free to insert your own headcanon. For the new Star Wars canon, this ship hasn't made a jump over yet, but I'd recommend that they not only look for this design, but maybe some of this really cool backstory which has been invented. As of right now, we have even less information on the military of the Hutts. We don't really know what happened to them post-Endor either. Most of the information we hear comes from For example, the Book of Boba Fett and other sources like the Aftermath trilogy hint that the Hutts have a significantly declined power. However, if the Hutts did maintain their territory, it can be assumed that it was thanks in large part to starships like the Dor'bulla, which would have been a great help against even the strongest New Republic or perhaps even First Order designs. Sometimes a starship can be kept relevant like the Dor'bulla, all thanks to, let's be honest, its sheer size and armament, and that's essentially what the Hutt mindset was and how they stood against a bulwark to pretty much anyone who countered them. Now, Hutt space did encounter, I'll call it a major setback during the Yuuzhan-Vong War when several of its planets were Vong formed, i.e. they underwent Vong terraforming. This was largely due to the fact that the Hutts tried to play middleman in this conflict. They wanted to work with the Yuuzhan-Vong and profit off the invasion, but they wanted to maintain their own territory, which of course did not end up happening. Had the Hutts simply held out against the incoming force, I think that Hutt space would have been very low on the Yuuzhan-Vong invasion checklist simply because of the relatively small area, but the comparatively powerful military of the Hutts. The Hutts are a very old faction within the Star Wars universe. As anyone who's read the Essential Guide to Warfare knows, there's a really cool section on Zim the Despot, and how things are going great for him in his new empire until he ran into a particularly nasty Hutt named Cossack. The Hutts at this point had actually established basically their slave empire, and the book talks about how the Klatooinians, the Nikto, and other species basically signed their rights away to become client species of the Hutts, which also helps explain why they're everywhere when the underworld comes up. Anyway, Zim the Despot faced off against the Hutts, and Cossack essentially challenged Zim to several key battles over Vondor, where Zim would suffer bad losses each time. Ships of this era, by the way, were much smaller than modern capital ships, and instead of having shields, often used reflective surfaces, which could sometimes dissipate the much lower energy weapons. Anyway, not only would the Hutts win the war, but many of Zim's war machines would actually remain dormant within Hutt territory. This, of course, would be really funny when the Yuuzhan-Vong invaded and the machines were reactivated. The Yuuzhan-Vong, by the way, hated anything mechanical, so these long ancient machines coming back to life and attacking fearlessly probably would have been quite shocking. Anyway, that's all I've got for now. Let me know what you thought of both the official lore of the Hutts and some of the fandom lore for the ship we talked about in today's video. Are you okay with me talking about fan speculations or fandom ships, or would you prefer that I just keep it strictly official, whether canon or Legends? Also, are there any other minor factions you'd like to see me cover? I think personally that the Hapens are desperately due for a video, but I'm sure you'll let me know. Anyway, until next time, be safe, have a good one, and may the Force be with you.